So director Peter Hyams takes a very interesting turn towards horror, with a creature feature that has a certain level of criticism levied against it. So let's see how terror evolves with the Relic. While studying tribes in South America, anthropologist Dr. John Whitney drinks a concoction made by the tribesmen, which soon seems to take an odd effect on him. He later attempts to remove his cargo from a ship bound for Chicago, but his request is denied by the captain. Whitney then sneaks on board, but is pained when he is unable to locate his cargo. 6 weeks later, the Chicago police, headed up by Lieutenant Vincent Agusta, investigate the very same ship, which arrived with everyone dead on board, but no definitive evidence as to why. The following week, Dr. Whitney's cargo finds its way to the Field Museum of Natural History, where evolutionary biologist Dr. Margot Green takes an interest in the plant samples, packed into the otherwise empty crate. Meanwhile, Dr. Green competes with colleague Greg Lee for a grant for the wealthy Blaisdells, who the museum have invited to the opening of the Superstition exhibit. However, a vicious attack on a night security guard puts things into upheaval. Lieutenant Agusta is brought in as the chief investigator and won't open up the museum until they determine who or what is responsible. With the victim's head decapitated and the hypothalamus from his brain removed, Agusta seeks answers from Dr. Green and her scientific staff. Yet in the bowels of the museum, the police are startled by a hostile vagrant, whom they shoot and kill. The presence of an axe with the deceased suspect leads the museum's head of security to force Agusta to reopen for the night's gala event, with some added pressure from the mayor. Mysteries are heightened when a beetle that crawled into Dr. Whitney's plants emerges having grown to an unnatural size and startling Dr. Green. This intensifies her analysis, fearing something horrible may have come from these plants. Meanwhile, as the black tie event unfolds, the lieutenant takes a search party deep into the subterranean tunnels of the museum. There, the police encounter a monstrous predator that lays waste to nearly everything in its path. As the cops try to evacuate the building, the beast's thunderous disruption activates the security gates and kills the power, locking many of the staff and guests inside. Agusta takes charge of the situation alongside Sergeant Hollingsworth to get everyone to safety, but it proves to be a dangerous task. Now as this creature ravages his way through victim after victim, Dr. Green comes to a startling revelation about the mutative properties of these plants, and the very human origins of this vicious beast, a relic of a tribal culture. So January 10th, 1997 saw the theatrical release of The Relic in the United States and rolled out to many international territories throughout the rest of the year, but kind of the interesting thing with the whole box office of the entire film is that it did exceed expectations upon its opening weekend in the United States, garnering about $9 million, but the film was actually ended up being a box office bomb because it cost between $40 to $60 million, depending on what sources you look at, but overall, worldwide, the box office grossed only about $48 million, about $33.9 million in the United States, and an extra $14 million in international territories. And the film did have a couple of delays in terms of some reshoots they did and some other things in post-production that kind of pushed it off for a couple of months, so might have been originally like a September, October 96 release, get in that sort of Halloween type of atmosphere or something like that to sell off a kind of horror creature feature type of thing that maybe would have garnered a little extra money, but I don't think it would have probably pushed it so far over the top, would have been a major money maker for the entire studio Paramount. But getting back all the way to the beginning of this entire project, because it is adapted from a novel from Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child called Just Relic, which was released in 1995, so kind of picked up the rights for this thing pretty quickly and get it into development. And kind of the interesting type of thing is that director Peter Hyams, who is also the cinematographer on this film and done stuff like Outland and Running Scared and Time Cop and Sudden Death, some really nice films. He had grown up in New York right across the street from the Museum of Natural History. and always had sort of like a certain affinity for the entire thing, the setting of that whole place, and spending hours there and kind of just letting his imagination kind of envelop in a certain way to think about different projects and different things he got going on in his head. And there's always this sort of dream he had in terms of being like trapped in the museum at night and being kind of creeped out by certain things and all these different things. So kind of eventually came to a fruition between that sort of thing he had in the back of his head there and getting into this project, which the novel is actually set at that museum in New York. But once they actually got everything kind of sorted out with all the different screenwriters they have on this film, which probably worked on one draft and they brought in some other people to work on a different draft to adapt the whole thing, they couldn't actually get the cooperation of the Natural History Museum in New York because of maybe some past problems with other productions or certain things they didn't like in the script of this story. And so kind of threw Peter Hyams a little bit because he was so beloved about that location, his old neighborhood. But eventually landed on the fabulous Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, which I absolutely love. It's a fantastic place right next to Soldier Field. But they did end up shooting a lot of things on sound stages where you had a lot more control over the environments and they could do a lot more things to damage the environments here and there. So a lot of the places where they're shooting much more in like the sort of place where they have the sort of gala ball or whatnot, and that's the whole thing's on the sound stage, and a lot of the places inside the entire guts of the entire place is all sound stages where they can just ramshackle things and damage things as they need to without hurting the actual property of the Field Museum, but still got a lot of value out of it. All the stuff with the exteriors looks fabulous. All these different things. So they got a lot of good cooperation from the city of Chicago and the Field Museum to actually use the location as best they could for the entire film. But as Peter Hyams is not only just the director, but also the cinematographer for the film, as he is for most of his films, there's a certain criticism that has been levied against this film, has been widely talked about, is the fact of how he decided to mainly light the film. Because he was so much a guy who's like, always had this heavy light and shadow contrast with like smoky haze on his films. It's like that was his signature look. A little bit desaturated, a little bit muted here and there, but always could tell that's a Peter Hyams film. But this one he kind of pushed it towards a certain level here where he went for what you don't see is scarier than what you do, which is a very good concept that runs through some very good horror films. But the way he shot things, the way he lit things, which is much more towards like a naturalistic style. He believes that anything that shouldn't be lit shouldn't get light on it. You shouldn't just light things because it's there. You think you should light things because that is the way it naturally should be in the environment that you're in. And so that's a certain way to look at things, but it ultimately creates a lot of problems for the film. The way he decides to go much more naturalistic, much more minimalistic in how he lights things, a lot of things are underlit in the whole film. There's so much darkness in the film that it's been very difficult to see this film properly on home video formats. Some people have definitely said that people who saw it in the theater still feel like even the best transfers on home video still have not captured what it looked like projected on film in the cinema. Obviously, going from VHS and Laserdisc, the analog video format just would not do it any favors whatsoever. DVD, maybe a marginal step forward. The Blu-ray is probably the best, obviously the best version of it, but still has a lot of shortcomings. Still a lot of things in terms of the transfer, how the thing looks, still just does not show up very well. It still makes the film look very dark, and just like that's how he shot it, that's how he lit it, but it doesn't do the film a lot of favors because it puts a certain strain on the audience after a certain length of time where it's like, I just need some light to feed my eyes in this whole thing. Just having everything so dark and dim and so minimally lit just doesn't create a very engaging film to look at. Obviously, a lot of these things kind of hide some of the limitations and some of these digital effects work in the film. As the creature starts getting more and more revealed in the film, the more you need to skewer more of it because the CGI work has some contentious qualities to it. But the fact of the matter is, like, there's certain shots that do look wonderful in the film. Certain shots are in the Field Museum and have this nice wide shot in the opening form or whatnot. Looks beautiful. There's some points where the photography looks really nice, but it doesn't quite have as much quality to it. Doesn't have as much exposure as you want to. So if you listen to Peter Hyams' commentary on the film from the old Blu-ray, he does talk about the different lenses he uses and his ideas about how he wants to light things and how he wants to do things, and how certain people thought he just kind of uses available light, which is a ridiculous concept because, again, he's shooting on a lot of sound stages, and so you have to get lights in there and light it the way you want to, so that's a ridiculous concept. Certain films have gone that route, but in this type of film, Peter Hyams does not go in that way. He just has a specific style that he wants to go for that maybe worked better in the theater than it has on home video, but as home video has been where it's lived for the last 20 plus years or whatnot, about 20, almost 25 years now, that's kind of a problem. That's kind of a problem. That's like it just hasn't looked quite so good, and how he actually photographed it creates some shortcomings for how people can enjoy the film overall. But despite that pretty major problem with the entire film, I do feel like Peter Hyams, as a director here, does a pretty good job with things, and is supported by a pretty solid cast. Like, Penelope Ann Miller was in some pretty major films at this point, like Carlito's Way and Chaplin and Awakenings and Biloxi Blues, and some more fun fare like Kindergarten Cop, Adventures in Babysitting, and The Shadow. But man, she's fantastic. She just radiates something so welcoming on screen, so inviting. She's got such natural beauty, but such natural talent as well. She just projects something out on the screen that's very bright and relatable, and so many interesting things that you just feel warmth with her character. Just the way they present her and how she comes in the film, she just feels like she has such a great energy to everything going on. And I like the fact that she's actually she is the top billed star here because she had been in so many major films at this point in time, and she does kind of carry a brunt of the entire story. Aside from, like, Tom Sizemore, as I get to later on, has much more of the action stuff. She's a little bit more involved with the mechanics of the plot in a certain way, all the kind of science stuff, and she's very convincing as a very intelligent scientist. A lot of people who are, like, very beautiful women and stuff like that kind of go into a film like, I don't believe that you're some major physicist or some other weird type of thing, but she has an inherent sensibility of being a very smart individual here, that you can see the quality of what she brings to the film, that you believe everything that she's saying in these situations, talking about all the different pieces of science here. I like so much how she is just that good of an actress to kind of bring all that technical jargon to life and make it fit for the character and her performance here. She just has all these different qualities you really want of a protagonist of her style, where she does have that strength of will and all these different things, where she's going up against this kind of jerk co-worker, this kind of guy who's competing for the same grant that she desperately needs, but he's being kind of a dick about things, and she stands up very strongly against that. She stands up very strongly against Tom Sizemore character, a Lieutenant Agusta. She has a very good quality that she is a very assertive type of character, that you can feel that she is in control of her own stuff in the film, and she still has vulnerabilities. She can still get terrified of certain things, but she has a nice multi-dimensional quality to her that I think she is very, very suited for, and she fits it very, very well in this whole thing. I thought she was just an entire bright spot the whole film. She gets great chemistry with everyone she works scenes with, and puts together some good stuff overall that I feel like she just holds everything together very nicely in this film. I thought she did a great job getting up with Tom Sizemore in this whole film to kind of get a little ebb and flow between the two of them that does kind of aid the film overall, to make sure that they are two solid leads pushing the plot forward on their own merits and their own areas of the entire story here. I think they did a fantastic job with her. And Tom Sizemore is a very interesting choice to get into a lead here, because he'd mainly been doing supporting roles throughout the 90s, like Point Break and Passenger 57, Strange Days, and Heat, and all doing a very good job. He was really building himself up very strongly throughout this decade. Obviously, later on, get some substance abuse problems that kind of definitely negatively impacted him on many different levels, but have seen him in other roles post that point in time, and he's still continued on to be a very good actor. And as Lieutenant Vincent Agusta here, it's very interesting because in the novel, there's actually two separate characters. There's Vincent Agusta and FBI Special Agent Pendergast, and they decided to just kind of fold both characters into one here. So you just have Lieutenant Agusta here, portrayed by Tom Sizemore, to get the story a little bit more streamlined, to get more condensed, to get it flowed to a certain degree, where you have fewer main characters to focus on. Which works, so you have to do things in an adaptation to move it from one medium to work in another medium a little bit better. Some people will debate which one is the better product in terms of the novel versus the film here, but regardless of how that turns out, I think Tom Sizemore does hold the film up very nicely. I think he's very sharp. I think he's very sharp in this film. He brings a lot of interesting qualities to the surface here in terms of being an intelligent investigator and all these very charismatic type of things. He has a lot of good chemistry with everyone he works with the entire film. If he has one scene or something like that with someone here, he's right on point every single moment. Everything flows, everything hits on the right beats that he has to get to. He's very, very sharp. And everything that Agusta is hitting on the nose here about the investigation, why certain things don't work, why certain things don't really add up. Certain things just kind of have to click in his head the right way, and certain things just aren't getting there in terms of how all this investigation about these decapitated bodies and slashed up torsos are not falling into place for him in a certain way. So I like how that moves the story forward, and he was very much interested in being kind of a main protagonist, because he always been mainly just like a supporting role, as I said before. So it's kind of interesting to get a little bit more like the driving force behind the story here. And I think he does a really good job. I like what Sizemore was doing in the 90s. He just had a lot of that charisma, a lot of that slickness and whatnot, and how he presented different roles here. And he certainly has that certain thing with the whole superstitions. And it does get kind of tied up later on with the sort of magic bullet that he keeps hanging around himself, because there's one situation where he was going to be shot by a certain perpetrator, but the bullet didn't fire out of the gun, despite the fact that later on finds out there is nothing wrong with the gun. So he thinks the bullet was a lucky bullet that didn't fire and saved his life. So he keeps it around, and now he's super on with all the superstition stuff, and it kind of becomes less of a character trait and more of just a running gag in the film. So it's like it doesn't really kind of impact the plot in any way. It's kind of things like you create a character trait, but it doesn't really factor into how he deconstructs the plot or any other things going on with the investigation or anything like that. It's just there to kind of have a little quirky sensibility, because they just have this sort of superstition-themed exhibit there at the museum that kind of just make it a little bit kitschy in that type of way. So it's kind of an odd type of thing. It's like, it plays kind of well, he plays it nicely, but just feels a little too much like they're trying to go for comedy laughs in that regard, and not really kind of driving it home as like a deep-seated sort of character trait that impacts how he makes decisions in the course of the narrative in a certain way. It's just kind of there just to be a kind of a quirky type of thing that I think just could have been integrated into the plot with a little bit more cleverness in a certain way, or a little bit more interesting twist to certain things, how he dealt with certain things, because the entire horror plot really doesn't hinge on any of that type of stuff. And of course, they still go on with like running gags, like no one can really pronounce his last name the right way, everyone keeps mispronouncing it, stuff like that. So it's just an odd type of thing how they keep going for slight comedy type of things in a certain way, where the film is trying to be kind of a serious horror film. But I like so much how Sizemore just has that confident, motivated attitude through the entire thing. Just like he keeps pushing everything forward, like I said. And Sizemore, I think, just does a really solid job here. I think Peter Hyams really found really good leads for this film to really balance the story out between the science stuff and the much more action cop type of things. I think it worked out really well between them, and also get some pretty nice type of stuff. You got James Whitmore here, and you got Linda Hunt, who's always delightful. She always has a really good quality of like this short statured lady, but always can bring forth a certain level of humor and also a certain level of authority. She really just has a great screen presence despite her stature or whatnot. She always brings something bigger and stronger than what you'd expect for her to give. And James Whitmore brings a little wit to things here and there as one of the mentors of Dr. Green and stuff like that. So I think they got some nice actors in this whole film. There's a lot of character actors for the entire film that don't amount to a whole lot. They're just a lot of characters to kind of make the plot go in certain places here and there, and don't really add as much to the entire film as I really could comment on here and there. But I think everyone slots into their roles very nicely. I don't think anyone was miscast in any type of way. I just feel like the film could have been a little bit tighter in terms of the tone and stuff like that, to make sure that you focus more on the tension and the suspense, and you get a little less in terms of the popcorn kind of thrills and scares. Some of them are false. Like you have a freaking cat scare at the beginning of the film, which is like the low point of any horror film. Then you got like the whole thing is like, okay, Dr. Green, she's going through this superstition exhibit, then she feels like there's something chasing her or something like that. She runs to the bathroom and it's like, oh, it's just the cleaning woman with some asthma or whatnot and stuff like that. And then the whole thing in the basement where the cops come across the guy down there who's kind of the wino or what the hell, well, what else is like, Certain things are jump scares, some are false scares, because you don't have as many, like, genuine freaking monster attacks early in the film, so you gotta create some false stuff to kind of throw out the audience and kind of keep things going a certain way. So it's like, it's a little cheap in some places at the beginning of the film, so it's a little wanting in that regard. It's like, I don't really like false scares. It doesn't really do anything for the film except kind of realize you don't have as much to keep the film going on that level. And there's also a problem with the editing in this entire film. Something very weird going on with a lot of the dialogue scenes here because they're edited so erratically. And editor Stephen Capper had done some pretty solid work. He'd already worked on Sudden Death and Time Cop for Peter Hyams, did New Jack City, and worked with John Woo on Face Off and Mission Impossible 2. So I don't know where this problem came in, but it's like, it feels like we shot coverage from different angles, and he feels like he has to cut between every single angle. Can't waste any footage here. Every angle that we shot the scene from, he needs to quickly cut back and forth between every single angle, every reaction shot, and the whole thing. There's not like a point where he just kind of lets the dialogue and the actors just play the scene. Not a point where just like it feels like there's any kind of rhythm or any kind of ebb and flow between the edits of the dialogue scenes. It's all all over the place. I don't really understand why that happened because I haven't really seen that happen in any of his other work. I don't know if it's just something Peter Hyams decided on, or God knows what it is, but just like every time I keep seeing weird dialogue scenes, like you're just cutting all over the place for no reason whatsoever. Like you punch into a close-up and there's no point to it. It's just because the footage is there and you decide to cut to it. It just felt like it was very all over the place where all the other sequences in the film really don't have a problem in terms of the editing. It's all edited pretty well. But all these dialogue scenes just feel very, very disjointed and clunky and all that type of stuff. Just didn't come together very nicely. And, kind of sort of aided by the John Debney score here, who's a really damn good composer. He did a really good job on friggin' Sudden Death. I just absolutely love what he did on Sudden Death. Did a great job on Predators, a lot of other good things. This one didn't really stand out as much. It's still good work. It just like doesn't really come out and just kind of give you something extra in the entire film. It just feels like a pretty regular sort of monster movie, almost horror score in a certain way. It's kind of going for building up the thrills and stuff like that. But I didn't really feel like it kind of did anything particularly special on this occasion, but he's still a fantastic composer and doing wonderful stuff. And also doing wonderful stuff for this film as much as he could was Stan Winston and his team doing all the creature effects and all the other gory type of things we get in the entire film. And the physical, practical effects are very, very good. Talking about all the gory and decapitated bodies and all the gooey, grisly type of stuff looks excellent. Because it's Stan Winston. Of course he does it excellent. It's all very creepy and just gross and stuff like that. The creature itself is a very interesting type of thing. Because they wanted to design something that just had certain different qualities of like different animals. There's a little bit of lion in there. There's a little bit of spider in there. There's a little bit of lizard in there. Stuff like that. So they kind of took little different things to make it feel a little bit more mythological in a certain way. And also mutated to a certain degree. And so they just wanted to have certain qualities that made it look less human and more scary and stuff like that. But how they ended up designing the whole thing, and the designer was kind of regretting how he designed it after he saw how the performers in the suit had to go through such a strenuous type of thing every single day on set, because it was hard to design it around someone actually puppeteering it in a suit when he had all the servos and all the other stuff going on and all that type of stuff using the animatronics. You still had a guy inside of it, and it's kind of this weird type of thing where they had to spend like 3 months training the guy to kind of walk in this sort of quadruped type of uncomfortable situation. And so that type of thing kind of developed there, and there was just a lot of complications because even though he had the guy in the suit, he can't move as much or move nearly as fast as the script and the story call for. So the entire thing is like, even though everything looks pretty good with the physical effects there, once you see all these stills and whatnot, what Stan Winston Studios has released, all the actual full design and the whole thing fully lit, still looks pretty good. But they weren't using stop motion animation at this time or anything like that. This was post Jurassic Park, and they wanted to use the same type of things. Like for the close-up shots, you got all the stuff that's practical. You're just using the puppeteering, all these different things. But when you really need it to move, they need to use digital effects. And man, they're not good. They just really, really don't look good. They're trying to hide it like I said, with the cinematography being so dark, it does aid in trying to mask some of the digital effects limitations. But they don't mask them all. And just once you start watching this film and just seeing how it's moved, it's like it just doesn't have the quality to it. The resolution or the textures or something like that, it just doesn't look good. And especially when you do get in more brightly lit scenes, like you have with the SWAT team rappelling down, you get this one shot, it looks terrible. And at the end of the film, the end of the film is the worst. Once the entire lab starts going on fire, and everything's so brightly lit and catches on fire, it looks awful. The CGI just looks terrible. It does not hold up well. Even at the time, I can't see anyone really highly praising the effects on this whole thing. There's a lot of bad qualities. The digital effects is just not good. For 1996-97, if you don't have the highest budget, the biggest budget you can get, and the most time possible, the digital effects are just not going to come through. And that shows through a lot of films throughout like the mid to late 90s. They just don't have the time and the money to get them on that best level possible that you get with a James Cameron, with a Steven Spielberg, with the biggest names in the industry who can pull on those resources, pull those strings, and make sure that everything comes up to the highest degree possible. So you settle for middling, and it's not good enough for the film. It really degrades so much about what the film can do, because if you don't believe what you're seeing on screen, you can't be afraid of it. If it looks like crap, you're kind of done. You can't be scared of some badly rendered CGI monster on screen. And it really just is a detriment to the film, but there's a few other detriments to the film. There's like, again, there's a certain sequence in the entire film. Because we've already seen the monster pretty much fully exposed to us to a certain degree. We've seen it kind of going into that main sort of gala ball area and attack people and rain down certain things on people and chomp people apart. And it looks massive. It looks huge. I think it was supposed to be about 14 feet long. It looks maybe like, 7, 8 feet tall when it's fully standing up and whatnot. Then you got the entire sequence down in the sewer or whatnot, where it's like everyone's in like maybe about 4.5 feet of water, and this thing is supposedly underwater grabbing people, pulling them down. It's like, I don't think so. That scale's not right. That size is not right. There's no way that thing is fitting in that shallow of water and not anyone seeing it. It's just not possible. I just don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. And in between all that, you also got the whole thing was like, once you got the SWAT rescue team rappelling down, it's like they're all getting attacked by the monster, but this is supposed to be a SWAT team. They're supposed to have guns, right? No one fires a gun. The one that drops down into the floor actually drops his gun and runs away from the monster. It's like, do you guys not have any weapons to combat this thing at all? That would seem like the logical thing. If there's something going down here, and you're sending in a SWAT team with body armor, you'd think they'd have some weapons to use against this thing. It's just kind of a ridiculous sequence to me that these guys keep rappelling down and they don't fire on it or do anything to it. They just got maimed and chomped apart pieces. And the whole thing is like, the monster just jumps all over the goddamn museum. It's like it'll be down here in the basement, then it's up here in the freaking exhibit area, then it goes back down here, and it goes up here, and it goes all the way back down to the basement. It's like it jumps up and down all over the place, and no one hears this thing moving anywhere. No one hears it. This thing probably weighs God knows how many thousands of pounds, and no one hears it walking and stomping around this place whatsoever. It's the most silent monster you've ever seen on screen. Nothing happens until you actually need to have some sound design to show it off in the climax of the film. It's kind of ridiculous in that regard. It's like this giant monster in these small corridors and all these different things, and it just kind of moves around silently. And it moves around so fast, up and down, in and out, in all these different places. It really hurts the credibility of the film and the suspension of disbelief you need to go into it. It still has fun qualities. It's still a thrilling, it feels much more action thriller than horror film to me. I don't feel like Peter Hyams quite understands to get atmosphere and tension, suspense going. All these different qualities that really need to happen in something that you want to scare the audience with. Sure, there's grisly things that get a kind of rise out of the audience, but I don't think there's quite as much like edge of your seat type of things you get with the best things in this type of genre, where you have like John Carpenter's The Thing or Alien or various other things that use creatures to very effective uses to get things very terrifying for the audience. So it feels much more action-oriented than it is a horror film to a certain degree. Certainly has the elements of terrifying creature that's rampaging, that's horrifying to encounter, and has certain scenes where it is scary. Like when it finds James Whitmore's character, it's kind of scary in a certain way, just like how it's just standing there, staring him down. It's kind of creepy. There are creepy moments in the film, like when that beetle comes out of the freaking cooler or whatnot, all oversized because it munched on the freaking steroid type of things in the plant or whatnot. That's scary. That's creepy. There are creepy elements to the film that does have effective moments. But overall, there is some detriments to the entire film. Like, again, the CGI, I won't even go on anymore about it. It's like, there's certain things like, okay, the tonal imbalance kind of affects things in certain ways. Like, I get what they're kind of going for. They want to have some kind of funny little things here and there, like the wife took the dog into divorce or whatnot. That's kind of a thing. You can make something out of that as a sympathetic type of thing instead of just being a comedy type of thing. It's just there to get a laugh. You could use it much more to a deeper effect for the character if you wanted to make it a little bit more of a sympathetic type of thing instead of just like it's an offhanded joke. And it tries to keep going for offhanded jokes here and there. And it's like, they're fun, they're kind of kitschy or whatnot. But I think it would be stronger if they went much more deeper with the things. They do much more deeper with the character traits and made them less of a running gag and much more of a thing that factors into their psychologies and factors into the depth of the character. So just like funny thing here, and not much of a scary type of film in a certain way. So it's like it feels like it needed a deeper focus. I think the Relic needed a deeper focus to make it a little bit better of a film. And it's kind of the interesting thing is like this kind of feels a lot like what Deep Rising was, like a year after this, a big special effects monster creature feature. It's like it had all this work into its like big set pieces and action stuff and CGI that still is fucking dated as shit. But they're both kind of fun movies in their own regard, but both films got dumped out in the middle of fucking January by their respective studios. Didn't give them much of a fucking marketing campaign. The posters for both films just feel like a bunch of teaser posters that don't really reflect the films very well. Feels like they kind of gave it a half-hearted attempt to kind of get it out there and didn't do a great job of it in any type of way. So it's like, I kind of look at these two films like they would be almost kind of a nice double feature in a certain way. I think Deep Rising comes out better on the end of it because I think Deep Rising knows what it is. Deep Rising knows that it's fucking schlock and it's fun as hell and it's a really good type of thing. You got Treat Williams and doing some wonderful stuff in that film. I like Deep Rising a whole lot. The Relic is a little bit more of a mixed bag to me in certain ways. Like the photography type of thing, the lighting and the whole thing is a major detriment. You need to have the film look a little stronger in a certain way. And maybe if this film ever gets a new like special edition treatment, you get a brand new 4K scan or whatnot, maybe it looks a whole lot more spectacular in a certain way, a lot more dynamic, a lot more interesting, get a little bit more proper highlights in the entire film. Who knows? But it's like the film has certain flaws and problems to it, but I think there is still an audience for the film. A lot of people like it doesn't connect for certain people, doesn't quite get on with it. Some other people really like the whole film. I think I'm just a little bit in the middle. Like I'm not wowed by the film, but I kind of appreciate it. I kind of appreciate it to a certain degree. I like the cast. Sizemore is great. Penelope Ann Miller is fantastic. I like Peter Hyams' films. I like Outland. I like Time Cop. I like Sudden Death. These are good films. 2010's a good film to me as well. It's like he does good films, and some things like End of Days after this, where he kind of follows on kind of the similar path in a film that's not terribly good. It's very dated, doesn't come off well over time. He still makes good films in a certain way. In regards to the other things, I think there is still a certain quality with this whole film that I think is worthwhile to check out. I would definitely say if you're not too fussed about the special features that are on the old Blu-ray, the brand new one from Paramount has a much stronger stronger transfer in terms of like it's a higher bitrate transfer. I think the audio is a little stronger, even though it's 5.1 instead of the 7.1, which was on the original Blu-ray. I don't think that was a true 7.1 remix. 5.1 is still the original theatrical audio, but is a much stronger presentation overall versus the old one, which had a small interview from Peter Hyams, then kind of a redundant type of thing over in the commentary where he talks a little bit more sparsely about how he filmed the movie and how he uses certain technical details about making the film and some minor personal stories. So if you're not too fussed about that, I think the new Blu-ray is still a good thing. If you're maybe waiting for a much more involved type of release, who knows when that's going to happen, if it will ever happen. But if you want to get it on physical disc, the new one from Paramount is the one to get, with a much higher bitrate for the transfer. It looks much better in that regard. So let me know what you thought about it, and also there's always the Patreon to contribute something every month to get more from this channel and help you support the channel to allow us all to keep kicking out all these fantastic videos, the fantastic commentaries, all that wonderful stuff. So there will always be more of that stuff coming around, but your support will also help to make that stuff happen much faster, more regularly, and hopefully you'll enjoy it all. So thanks so much, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.